Environmental issue as the most important and the most challenging one for this generation and the following one. So basically, it's a question of this century to be solved. And of course, with some of the sub-issues very famously discussed, climate change question, obviously one of the most important, but also some others like the loss of biodiversity and ecosystems, or the scarcity of resources, so overall, and the interlinkages between those issues, in my opinion, is one of the most challenging issues of this century. I would say that on top still we have climate change, because this affects so many people on Earth, but also when I mentioned the biodiversity and ecosystem issue, while in last decades the loss of biodiversity was basically due to land use and cities and other issues, but more and more the climate change issue also for this will be the overarching driver. So climate change is on top, and as we know, quite urgent, because climate change is already happening. It's not something for the problem of the future, it's a nowadays problem. Well, first of all, we have to look at the dimension of the problem, and that is following the IPCC analysis. We have to halve the greenhouse gas emissions by the mid of the century, 2050. And if you look at the fact that the developing countries and also the emerging economies still have to increase their economic activities, this means for the industrialized countries that we more or less have to completely decarbonize our energy system, our economies. This, of course, is a huge challenge, and means that we have to restructure our energy supply, our capital infrastructure. Yes, that's the starting point. And now to the solutions. We at the Environment Protection Agency in Germany believe that key is, of course, energy efficiency. So we have to save energy wherever possible, and the rest has to be restructured on a renewable basis during the next decades. That's the main solution in the electricity sector. Of course, we have some other sectors like mobility, where there are some concepts like electromobility, also, of course, very different transport and traffic system, moving to public transport, for example. But the key is the electricity sector, and their energy efficiency and renewables are the keywords. Well, it's interesting to have a look at the per capita greenhouse gas emission, and even if you exclude the historic emissions from the industrialized world, then looking at nowadays per capita emissions, you see that countries like India still have something around 2 tons per capita in year, and the rest of the industrialized countries are between somewhere 8 and 12 or even more tons. So from there you obviously can see that the reduction has to take place in the developed world. But looking at some of the very fast developing emerging economies like China, India, also some Latin American countries, we have to realize that also these countries have to limit their greenhouse gas emissions. Not absolutely, but compared to a business as usual scenario. So they also have to make their way on a low carbon track. Well, we had a look at this in the different geoengineering methods that are currently discussed at the Environment Agency in Germany, and in a nutshell, our advice is moratorium in using these technologies, but not in research on those technologies. Some of those technologies are quite risky with regard to the environment. For example, marine fertilization, where you put in fertilizers like iron oxygen to the marine. with quite an impact on the marine ecosystem, and there is only very little knowledge about this kind of methods and what it could cause for the biodiversity, the marine biodiversity. So just with this example, we would be very careful with any use of such methods, but still it might be useful to have better knowledge in future. Although we believe that the key to solve the climate change problem is mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, but we should be prepared in any case that the world doesn't take appropriate action. One answer is, of course, there is a complexity of reasons why society decides to go this or that way, and still we have a lot ahead of us. But the environmental policy field was in Germany has a long tradition to be quite consensual, not on the concrete track, but on the target. So people support environmental policy basically, and that is also true for climate change policy. And it is also the perception about the problem is in Germany that yes, people believe that we have a problem, that we have climate change. So it's different, for example, to the US, where while major parts of society don't believe in the fact that we have climate change, and if you don't believe you have a problem, then you don't have a need for a solution. And this is different here. And with regard to energy policy, it's quite different. There we have a long tradition and a controversial debate, especially about nuclear, which was now solved after the Fukushima catastrophe with a more or less consensual decision to phase out nuclear. Outcome of Durban or whatever climate change negotiation obviously would be an overall contract as a follow-up to the Kyoto Protocol. But the question is that whether this is very likely to happen or not, and I would be already very satisfied if Durban would agree on some basic cornerstones for a future contract. It's very unlikely that we will get a full-fledged contract already in Durban. We are too far behind in the negotiations, and we all know that the US and China are not in a position at the moment to sign a contract, and that of course makes emerging economies quite suspicious why they should sign a contract, whereas others with much larger emissions, also historic emissions, are not in a position.